Hi, everybody. Good evening, and welcome to this ballot questions forum this evening. Thank you for joining us after such a beautiful day. My name's Linda Foley, and I am chair of the Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee, the Montgomery County Democratic Party. Thank you for being here. Just to review a couple of things. One, we're going to be we would like everybody except the speakers to be on mute, please. And this event is being recorded by the Women's Democratic Club. We will be taking questions. You can submit them through the chat. And if you submit the questions, please address them to everyone so that we can see them. We'll take questions after all the speakers have finished speaking. So again, welcome. As you know, we have an election coming up. We're less than 30 days away. Every night it's like 30, less than 30 days. In addition to the very, very important election at the top of the ticket, and also for president, and also the congressional races that we have here in Montgomery County, most of you know that we have these very important ballot questions that we need to weigh in as citizens. So that's what this forum is about tonight. I would like to thank the sponsors of this event, the WDC, the Women's Democratic Club, the Association of Black Democrats, the Coalition of Asian Pacific American Democrats, the Green Democrats, the Latino Democratic Club, the LGBTQ Democratic Club, the Young Democrats, and the Montgomery County Democratic Party. So this is great. This is a great event because here we are all together, all diverse. Everybody's here, and we are ready to move forward. So we have quite a great lineup of speakers here tonight. First, you'll hear from the chair of the Maryland Democratic Party, Yvette Lewis, followed by former county executive Ike Leggett. Council member Nancy Navarro and Council member Andrew Friedson will also speak to us tonight, as well as Marilyn Balcom, who is the co-chair of Residents for More Representation, and Will Roberts, who is co-chair of Montgomery Neighbors Against Question B. So we have quite a great lineup. So let's get to it. I would like to introduce my partner and a great leader for us here, for we Democrats here in Maryland, the chair of the Maryland Democratic Party, Yvette Lewis. Welcome, Yvette.
Thank you all so much. I appreciate you having me here. And because you have such a vigorous agenda tonight, I'm not going to take a lot of your time. I just want you to know that your party has been working very hard. We've been devoting our time and resources to calling battleground states like Pennsylvania and Virginia and North Carolina and Florida weekly. We're calling Tuesday through Saturday every week, and these are the states that will decide the election. And the work that you're doing will help tip the scales in these very crucial states. We're also hosting targeted days of action, calling into important Senate states, because we know that it means nothing to win the White House if we cannot win the Senate. And I think all of us would be delighted to see Mitch McConnell take a hike. So we will be calling into Maine and South Carolina, Kentucky, adding states like Arizona, Colorado, and Minnesota in October. And I know South Carolina sounds like a stretch, but if any of you saw Jamie Harrison's debate on Saturday night against Lindsey Graham, you know he positively eviscerated him. And Jim Clyburn is even saying that Jamie is going to win South Carolina. That's the state to watch that I think could be the real upset of the night. Last week alone, Marylanders made over 30,000 calls out of state. But here in Maryland, we're focusing on educating voters, getting Democratic voters to the polls early, and ensuring that they have the information that they need. And that's where we're going to need your help. Starting this week, we will be doing ballot request reminders, reminding voters who haven't requested a ballot yet that they need what they need to know about the process and to make sure they get their requests in before the deadline. I will tell you that the Board of Elections is getting those ballots out when you send the applications in. I sent my application in, my husband did. We got our ballots last Tuesday. We filled out our ballots last Tuesday. We put our ballots in the ballot box last Tuesday. And today we got an email saying that our ballots had been received and processed. So we're asking all of you, early, please do it early, because if we overwhelm the system early, there will be no question on election night who won. There won't be enough votes to catch up for same day votes if we flood the system now. And that's what we're encouraging everyone to do. Starting October 10th, mail-in ballot chases. Here we'll be sure to contact voters who haven't yet returned or received their ballots and make sure they're educated on the process about returning them. And then we have a very robust voter protection team. The Maryland Democratic Party is implementing a robust voter protection program that will include in-state and out-of-state support. In-state, we will have volunteer poll workers at top precincts and polling locations across the state. If you have any volunteers interested in being a poll watcher, please check out our election info on our website, mddems.org. If you have any questions about voting for yourself or for anyone, please go to iwillvote.com. This is all hands on deck. We can change everything if we turn out and vote. So thank you all so very much for having me here tonight. This has been great, but it's going to be even better on November 4th if we do everything that we're supposed to do. So thank you all.
Yay, all right. Amen to that. And I know that Yvette and her team have been working really, really hard and have been organizing so many phone banks and other activities to make sure that Marylanders are engaged. So now we're going to move to the discussion of the ballot questions. Let me just say that all of the clubs that are sponsoring this, and I believe all of the Democratic clubs, and I know the Montgomery County Democratic Party we have all taken a position on the ballot questions. We are urging everyone, all voters, to vote for question A, to vote against question B, to vote for question C, and against question D. And now we're going to move to our speakers for tonight to tell us some reasons why those votes are important. Now I'd like to call on someone that we all know, who's with us tonight, former County Executive Ike Leggett. Mr. Leggett. You're muted, sir.
Thank you, and thank you for all the great work that you do on behalf of the Democratic Party, Montgomery County, the state, and the nation as a whole. Certainly, it was not my intent to be here tonight discussing with you a ballot initiative or something to do with politics here locally, because I had made a commitment that I did not want to get involved. But after looking at the challenges that we face, given this pandemic, and the difficulties that Montgomery County finds itself in today and what is ahead in the foreseeable future, I thought it would be irresponsible for me to simply sit on the sideline. And so I wanted to get engaged on this issue, on these ballot initiatives. But before I say anything else, let me say up front, Initiative B and D are bad. Let me repeat that. Initiative B and D are bad. The magnitude of those two initiatives as they impact Montgomery County at this time is simply too great to ignore. Now, many of you may look at this and say, wow, we have a large number of Democrats who overwhelm this Democratic Party locally has endorsed these initiatives as just indicated a moment ago. But here's the challenge that you probably have forgotten about. This is a presidential election year. So large number of voters who come out this year are voters who only vote once every 4 years. They're not as engaged on all the other initiatives. They're not as engaged on all the other candidates that are running for office. They're coming out, a good part of them are coming out because they are concerned about the presidential election, and that is good. But many of them do not vote on the down balloted initiatives. If you look at it, for example, probably only about 55 to 60% of the people will actually vote on these initiatives. So if you have one dedicated source of voters who are committed to this, and you have a smaller number of people voting, this can be tilted in one way or the other. In addition to that, we're also voting in the atmosphere of a pandemic. No matter what people tell you about what they predict and how things will come out, this is unknown because we have not had this experience before. Now, particularly as it relates to B and D. B attempts to restrict further the tax limitations that we already have on the books in Montgomery County. Let me give you a little bit of a history about some of this. Some years ago, we had a recession. In my term as county executive, because of that recession, we had to close somewhere in the neighborhood of $3.3 billion. Let me repeat that, billion with a B. 1 year alone, it was $975 million. In order to close that gap, I had to be creative and use every tool in the book in order to, in fact, make certain that we could meet that objective. I furloughed county employees. I eliminated 1,254 positions. I reduced salaries. I even reneged on labor negotiated agreement. And at one time, we had to increase the taxes over and above the charter limit. Now, why did I do that? I did that because I was concerned about essential services. I did that because I was concerned about education. I did that because I know that we could have rebounded from that if we simply had the period of time in order to do so. I did so because I wanted to protect the AAA bond rate. Initiative B today will take away part of that flexibility, and we will not have the resources in order to respond to a crisis that we see now, or one that has the county already in the hole for over $200 million, and that number is likely to grow. As Democrats, we are concerned about what this impact will mean for people. You do not want to take away the tools for our local Democratic elected officials when you have to deal with this problem that we have today, a problem that continues to grow on healthcare, on public safety, on transportation, on jobs, on housing, all of the support that we as Democrats oftentimes support. We cannot afford to place further restrictions on our county government by reducing further. Reduction would mean not only you have to continue the 9-0 number in order to achieve an override, but you simply cannot override beyond the limit of inflation. And that may be no more than 1 or 1.5%. And given what we face today, that simply would not work. To put this initiative on the ballot by Mr. Ficker, this is not only foolish, this is foolishness on steroids. Let me repeat that, foolishness on steroids. This is irresponsible, reckless at best. Now, Initiative D. Now, people have said there may be some reasons for this. We have a large number of people who are elected inside the Beltway. At this point in time, we have only one female on the council. Keep in mind that I served for 16 years on the council, and I live in Burnsville. Right next to me, as I look out my window, I see cows, sheep, goats, and very few people out here. I'm far outside the Beltway. Michael Subin lived in Gaithersburg. Gail Ewan in Potomac. Nancy Florine lived in Kensington. All of those people were elected. And so what we're looking at is a brief period of time whereby you have a larger number of people who live inside the Beltway. But if you look at this historically, that is not the case, as it also relates to women. I served on a council when there were 4 women on the council, and I'm certain that that will be corrected. So what we're essentially looking at is an attempt to throw all of the work that we've had in the past, all of the challenges and difficulties and risks that come with this in order to address a challenge that is not a long-term challenge here in Montgomery County. It is not something that we've had historically, and it will self-correct, in my opinion, in just a few years. Now, having all district council members. Right now, you get an opportunity to vote for 5 council members. This will reduce it down to 1. Now, why is that the case? I think there are political motivations behind this, political motivation to enhance the electability of some people who cannot now effectively compete. That is probably the case. but we're going to throw out our current system that we have at-large members. And why do we have at-large members? Think about the challenges that we face today. We face challenges in the environment. If you have a polluted stream, that polluted stream does not remain in one district. If you look at the challenge of education, educational challenges are not within one district. The challenge of criminal justice is not in one district. And therefore, we are going to throw out the current system whereby you have a broad coalition of people who come together with both a district perspective as well as an at-large perspective in order to have 9 district councilmen, thereby producing parochialism, vote trading. If you look at our neighbors in Prince George's County and other communities, they have gone away from an all-district system to a system that combines both districts and at-large members. Please keep in mind what I'm saying. This is not effective government. This will have government paralysis, parochialism, vote trading in order to achieve an objective that is not a long-term problem. Vote against B, vote against D. A and C are good. Look at those as well. But if you do nothing else, make certain you convey a message that B and D are bad for Montgomery County. It is foolish. It is foolishness on steroids. We cannot accept that. Democrats need to understand the implication of this. For the many of the people that we work for, that have voted for us, we cannot turn our backs on them by allowing these 2 initiatives to go through. I urge you, I came out of retirement to say this to you. I hate to be here saying this, but unfortunately I am. Vote against B, vote against D. We have good governance. Montgomery County is a great place to live, to work, to raise a family. Let's keep it that way and vote against B and D. Thank you so very much.
And thank you, County Executive Leggett, for being here and for coming out of retirement to help us with this very important issue. Next, we have 2 members of the County Council here tonight. Council Member Nancy Navarro, representing District 4, and Council Member Andrew Friedson, representing District 1. Council Member Navarro.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you, Linda, so much. And it's great to see Ms. Yvette Lewis, as well as former County Executive Leggett, as well as all of you Democrats. And I really appreciate this invitation. I wanted to follow up on many of the things that County Executive Leggett said, specifically why B is really so bad. I happen to have the honor of chairing the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee since 2011, and was there during that time of the last recession, where we had to work hand in hand to really, truly just, use all of the tools that we had to make sure that we could set the county on the best possible course. We actually also rebased the school system's budget. When we looked at the trajectory and the projections of the deficit, it was something that we had to do, and I'm really glad that we were able to respond very quickly. The reality is that nobody prepared for a moment like the one that we are facing right now, because in this particular case, different from the last recession, right now we really don't have a full grasp on when will this particular pandemic be done. How are we going to address the fiscal impact? What is that fiscal impact really going to look like? And this is why this year the council actually put forth a resolution to adopt a continuity of services budget. In other words, we just wanted to fund those services that we needed in order to continue operating, and no enhancements, no additions, et cetera, because we knew we had to hold the line. This was in March, and we finalized our budget in May. And when we saw this particular proposal, it was so disheartening, because as we speak, even right now, we are facing major challenges in our county. We are so fortunate to have so many resources, but we also have a lot of need that has just been exacerbated by this pandemic. And many of you probably, have been out there volunteering or donating. We still see the very long lines with food distribution efforts, We know that many of our students, very vulnerable students, are facing really, really tough situations, evictions. We're very concerned about that. And so we've worked really hard on the county council along with the county executive to approve lots of initiatives to mitigate this impact. And we've been working around the clock. But this particular proposal, what it does is that it just totally ties the hand of elected leaders from here on out when it comes to the possibility of raising revenues. And if you can just imagine a county where, you know, things like our great library system, like, you know, education, transportation, healthcare, all of those things that right now are so pivotal. Imagine a county where our hands would be tied and those services would just begin to erode. And that is what this FICR amendment strives to do. It ties it to inflation. We've seen what inflation looks like right now. So you can just see that it just completely makes everything a lot more difficult, and it just chokes our ability to respond to those needs and to the services that all our constituents are used right now in our county, and those services that really define the quality of life here in Montgomery County. And so, you know, the history is clear. I mean, the county has consistently held the line on property taxes. You know, there have been a few instances where we've had to make that decision, and it was for very important reasons, such as, you know, reducing class sizes and things of that nature. That has been really important because it meant that students and parents receive more teachers, paraeducators, counselors, etc. We also know that this particular proposal will have a detrimental impact on our AAA bond rating. We're the only county that has consistently received the AAA bond rating since 1973. And even through that horrible recession. And it's because we always work together, and we are very, very clear on being, you know, super careful and to protect our fiscal health. And so that AAA bond rating says quite a bit regarding the discipline that this county leadership has had for all of those years. And that is why this particular proposal really doesn't make any sense. As a matter of fact, it just continues to perpetuate a lot of the misinformation that is happening at the national level, and it really is going to hurt us. And so this is why, you know, we worked, Councilmember Friedson began to draft an alternative, and we worked on that through our Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee. And the beauty of that alternative, which is question A, is that it actually incentivizes, you know, growth in the county, economic activity, and it allows us to capture that in order to then utilize those resources to continue to fund those very important services in our county. I think that we can all agree that we are right now so close to a defining election, an election that will define if we actually will rescue the soul of our nation. And Montgomery County has always been really proud of our values of inclusion, of always looking out for those who might be in need, of being in the forefront of so many incredible things. I mean, right now, you know, the COVID-19 vaccine through Novavax is right here in Montgomery County. I mean, we have so many assets, but we also have a lot of need. And this question B will just choke our ability to continue to be and actually enhance the quality of life in our county. So I want to turn it now to Councilmember Friedson to talk about the specifics of question A and why that is a much better alternative. Because, you know, for those who are worried and think that a future council could, you know, easily just raise the rates, you know, I think the question A is very clear on the fact that we will capture growth. We will continue to be fiscally responsible, but we're not going to choke ourselves just because Robin Ficker decided to come up with some other way of actually damaging the county. He's tried so many times. And here we have another, you know, Ficker special. So be as bad as it was said. And let me turn it now to my colleague, who is also a member of the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee, Andrew Friedson, representing District 1, to talk about question A and why that is a much better alternative.
Thank you to Councilmember Navarro. I really appreciate it. And B is bad and it's broken and it's backwards. A is the answer. is the second half of that. So remember that, yeah, for A and against B. First of all, I'm just so pleased to be here tonight. Yvette Lewis, one of the great Democratic leaders in our country, a dear friend of mine and one of my favorite people. Ike Leggett, who is probably the person who has the most credibility of anybody in the history of the county on managing through challenging fiscal times and through a fiscal crisis. Nobody has done that with the type of sobriety and seriousness that Ike Leggett had to, and has the black and blue marks of really difficult decisions that he had to lead on through that, and our entire county is benefited from the leadership that he had to show at some of the most challenging times. And so thank you for that. Coming out of retirement, although I've never heard of a more busy retired individual than Ike Leggett, although it's no surprise if you've ever seen him campaigning. One time I think I went to 8 4th of July events, and I thought I was pretty good, and they told me that Ike Leggett did 17, and I didn't feel quite as special. And Nancy Navarro, who I don't think has ever gotten nearly as much credit as she should on her fiscal stewardship as chair of the Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee, right there hand in glove with Ike Leggett, and leading and pushing the council to adhere to the fiscal policy, some of the things that are less sexy in policy making, but are critical to our ability to provide the type of services and the type of quality of life in Montgomery County that we all care about so deeply. And thank you to Linda and Diana and Leslie and Scott and everybody else who was involved in getting this event together. Question A is really simple. And for 30 years, our tax policy has been very complicated. It's based on a formula that uses the revenue collected from the prior year and adds on inflation. Inflation is something that is completely outside of the control of local government. It's a macroeconomic indicator. We can't make a policy decision at the county council. The county executive can't make an executive order to have any real impact on what the rate of inflation would be. And yet that is almost exclusively what our tax revenues are based off of. It's not the way I think it should be. It's not how it is in almost all other jurisdictions across the country. To give you a sense, the current rate of inflation is 1.27%. It's projected to be 0.6% next year, and the year after that it might be negative, depending on how long we are in some of the economic challenges that we face as a result of COVID. Again, having nothing to do with whether or not we've been good fiscal stewards, having nothing to do with whether or not we've grown the type of local economy that we want and that we need in order to maintain our quality of life and the level of services that Montgomery County residents expect and deserve. Question A is simple. It is a policy that would set a tax rate that stays the same each year unless 9 members of the county council vote unanimously to change it. That's it. Simple, straightforward. And the benefit of that is this. As property values grow, as the economy in the county grows, so too will the revenues that the county can generate. It puts businesses and residents and county government all in the same boat. It requires us to bet on ourselves, to focus on growing our local economy, and allows us to benefit from the full revenues and the full benefits of the economic development that we spend so much time focusing on and we spend so much time creating. It literally is the policy behind the tagline that every politician has always used. We need to grow the tax base so we don't have to raise the tax rates. That is what the policy does. That is what the policy allows. Again, it's not very complicated. Your tax rate will stay the same unless 9 members of the county council vote to increase it. And that will allow us to generate tens of millions of dollars over time without even needing to raise tax rates. It allows us to have a more equitable policy that treats residents and businesses more evenly, does not pick winners and losers as the current policy tends to do. And you heard about the AAA bond rate. I just want to put and the backwards and broken system of question B that question A would replace. And I just wanted to give a little bit of context to what that means, because a AAA bond rating is a sophisticated crowd and maybe the most sophisticated place in the country. And so AAA bond ratings are actually fairly well known here. But to put it in normal terms, losing the AAA bond rating, getting downgraded on our AAA bond rating would be $27 million in the capital budget. The budget we use to build schools and to pay for transportation and to build rec centers and libraries is $27 million. $27 million gone out of thin air, we'll never see again, we'll never have, and it will build upon itself. It would absolutely crush us. And so that's why Ike Leggett is stepping up and saying what he's saying, because he knows how valuable that could be and how important that it would be. That's why we have stepped in to say, we don't just want to stop question B, which is doubling down on a bad policy. We want to take the policy that we have that is broken, and instead of doubling down on a broken policy, we can fix it and create a good policy, one that will allow us to do it. The tax rate this year will be the tax rate next year. It will be the tax rate every year. And the only thing that I would say as well, one of the perverse aspects of the current system is that the 8.7% tax increase that you hear so much about, you'll hear Robin Ficker talk about this all the time for the next 4 weeks. Our property tax rate today is lower than what it was when it was raised, to the point it was raised before. Sorry about that. Our tax rate today is lower than the point at which it was raised 4 years ago. Lower than it was then. So we would solve that. We would create consistency. We would create stability. We would allow the county to benefit from the growth in the economy that we all want to see and we all want to support. And it would allow us to fund schools, libraries, transportation projects, and rec centers. I will close by just reminding you that question A is about fiscal responsibility. Question B really is about fiscal insanity. It is about betting on Montgomery County with question A, not joining Robin Ficker with question B and betting against Montgomery County. We don't need to double down on a broken tax policy. We can replace a policy that isn't working as well as we want it to with a policy that is simple, that is straightforward, that doesn't require a PhD in economic theory or an accountant to determine and figure out your tax rate this year will be your tax rate next year, unless 9 members of the county council vote to change it. I hope you'll vote for question A, against question B, and I really appreciate the opportunity to join you this evening, and I will turn it back to Linda Foley.
Thank you, Andrew. Remember, A is the answer and B is bad, okay? Next, we're going to hear from 2 folks, 2 county leaders about questions C and D. And I would remind everyone that when our speakers are finished, we will take questions in the chat. So you can go ahead and put your questions in the chat. Now I'd like to call on Marilyn Balcom, who is co-chair of the Residents for More Representation. She will be followed by Will Roberts, who's the co-chair of Montgomery Neighbors Against Question B. Marilyn.
Hi, everyone. So nice to see everybody. Again, Marilyn Balcom with Residents for More Representation. We support C and are against D. And we feel that in terms of more representation, question C will do that. Given that I'm talking to a group of stalwart Democrats, I know you'll appreciate a little bit of political history. So I think it's important to go back to how we got to this position before we move forward. So the first county council was elected in 1970. And at that time, it was all at large. So we had 7 members, all at large. There were 5 had to be in a specific geographic district, but they were voted for by the entire county, very similar to what the school board is now. So that was how the county, that's how the county council started. And then in 1986, there was a referendum that passed to go to 9 council members, 5 districts, and 4 at large. And so that referendum was 1986, that went into effect in 1990. And so that is still in place. So the important piece of that is that was 30 years ago. And the Charter Commission has looked at this a number of times, and they have looked at the 9 districts several times, and each time they have decided that the 9 districts was not where they wanted to go. One of the most important factors about our existing council districts, council makeup, is that every voter in Montgomery County gets 5 votes. So of the 9 council members, we get to pick 5 of those individually, and that's a critical point. So fast forward to where we are today. A group of residents got a ballot initiative on the ballot for this election, calling for 9 districts and the elimination of the at-large districts. And on the face, there's a lot of arguments that it might seem like a good idea, but as former County Executive Leggett laid it out so very clearly, there are strong arguments against D, particularly the issue of diminishing our vote. We would go from 5 votes to 1 vote. Only the district vote. So if we're looking at more representation and more involvement in our democracy, it just doesn't make sense to give up votes and give up our power in voting for the county council. And then also some might say that the 9 districts would create a parochial system where every council member is looking out for their little sliver of Montgomery County. At-large members play a pivotal role in looking at the county countywide, and not just looking out for one district. So that's important. But I think that for me, the most important issue is that the 9 districts just simply, they are making promises that they can't guarantee. There's no way that 9 districts will solve the problem that they talk about. Their biggest argument is that the council, that the at-large the current at-large members are focused down county. I live up county. I've been in the up county. I'm in Germantown. I've been in Germantown for 25 years. I will be the first person to stand on the mountaintop and say, we want at-large members up county, and that we would like to have elected members throughout the county. But this is not the answer, because as I think Jill had mentioned in the chat, somebody asked where these districts would go, whether it's the 7 districts or the 9 districts. We don't know where these districts are going to be. The districts will be drawn after the census. And so we don't know where the new districts are going to be. That I've been on panels with the 9 district folks several times, and their promise, or what they are espousing, is that the up county will magically get more representatives with the 9 districts, and that's simply not the case. The numbers don't bear that out. So when we look at the census, the assumption is that the up county will have grown in the past 10 years, but so will Silver Spring, and so will Bethesda, and so will Rockville. So even if the up county got an extra district, so will Silver Spring and Bethesda and Rockville. The balance of power will not shift. The only way that the balance of power will shift is if the up county votes at the same level as the rest of the county, and that's simply not the case. So I think that we want to look at question C. So question C came about as a looking at countering to 9 districts, but also more importantly, looking at the fact that this council, the existing council was established 30 years ago. In that 30 years, the population has grown 50%. So we do need to look at additional representation and looking at constituent services. Right now, each council member represents about over 200,000 people. So what question C will do is it will reduce the number of constituents per councilmanic district. And that is a good thing. That provides more direct service. But it's the best of both worlds. It keeps the at-large districts to provide the overall county perspective. And most importantly, it keeps our 5 votes. So that's important. I know that there was a question in the chat, so I'm going to precede it by saying, yes, this will cost additional money. Adding 2 council members, a council member is roughly $500,000 to staff the council seat. It's an investment in our governance. It's an investment in our democracy. Just as when our county grows, we build more schools, we build more libraries, and we need to protect the infrastructure and invest in our infrastructure. So I also want to say that Ike Leggett made a very, very important case about how critical it is to vote on these ballot initiatives. People who are passionate about an issue, who are for something, so people who are for D or for B are going to go to the polls to vote for those. We need to make sure that we go to the polls in higher numbers to counter that. And so it's really critical in this election to go down ballot to make sure that you vote for C and against D. And I think that I need to leave time for Will Roberts. He's the co-chair of the ballot committee, Montgomery Neighbors Against B, and he's gonna talk a little bit about C and D as well. Okay, thanks.
Well, thanks so much, Marilyn, and thanks everyone for being with us. The benefit of going last is that you get to clean up a little bit, and so we'll just have a couple of comments about question C and D, and then we'll circle back. I'll circle back to question B and A. As was mentioned, my name is Will Roberts. I'm the co-chair of an effort supporting question A and opposing question B called Montgomery Neighbors Against Question B. You know, I also live up county. I live in Clarksburg, and you know, on the district issue, one of the things that I've been struck by is the messaging around, as Marilyn mentioned, and others have mentioned, including former county executive representation. We've talked about, you know, this choice that folks are being faced with, which is indeed a false one. Had conversations with my neighbors and folks in our up-county Facebook groups. You know, there's a difference, right, between having 5 members representing you and having 1 person representing you. Those are just the facts. But something that is caught on, I feel, in the messaging from some of the folks behind the non-district question is this idea of equity issues. And I find it interesting because, and I'll just be, I know that these ballot questions are nonpartisan, but we are Democrats. And so just lay it on the table that a lot of the folks in support of the 9D plan, a lot of the money behind it, a lot of the effort behind it comes from the county Republican Party. And the reason being is that there's some opportunity that they see potentially in future potential district seats. And as Marilyn and others have said, no one knows where the district seats will be. And so being told that you're going to get a district in Clarksburg, where I live, you're going to get a district up in Poolesville, et cetera, is not accurate. We have to wait and see how the census numbers break out. But as Democrats, I think we need to understand what the thought process is behind this and breaking up the council in selling rather the idea of breaking up the council is saying we're going to be fighting on more equity issues, and there's some messaging that they've done pinpointing, you know, certain issues going on with schools in Gaithersburg, et cetera. But the folks behind that have not been with you and me and other folks who have been fighting for those issues all these years, right? They were not with us when Councilmember Navarro was leading the council on the huge and transformational racial equity legislation that went through the county. And so I think we've got to, it's so important to understand the nuts and bolts of what these questions actually are, but we've got to take a step back and understand sort of what these questions say about the future of our county and where you are on these questions, depending on where you sit. And so we just got to have that in mind. It is a false choice, again, that people are being asked to take on this district question. And Marilyn ran down the numbers for you perfectly. So, you know, I won't do that, but I'll mention, you know, that of our councilmen, this is the most diverse council we've ever had in terms of racial diversity, racial and ethnic diversity, I should say. And so our at-large council members bring a lot of that diversity in addition to Councilmember Rice, Councilmember Navarro. And so, you know, the idea that our at-large members help to bring in some of that diversity is not something that's cooked up. You can look at that and you can ask former County Executive Leggett about that. And so, you know, for me, question C is a middle ground, right? As Marilyn said, living up county, certainly there are folks, and it's not just up county folks that, you know, have been sort of swept up in this ballot question issue. I mean, in the district question issue, but living up county in particular, there's some needs that people say have not been addressed, and they're right. And we can have that conversation about why they haven't been addressed, how they can be addressed, but breaking up the council is not the way to address them. It's the way to, as folks said, give us more parochialism and gridlock. But with question C, you get the best of both worlds. You get the opportunity to have at-large members that are paying attention to a swath of issues across our huge, diverse county. And you get the chance to have your district representative working on issues that affect you most and closest. And under question C, you'd get 2 additional district representatives. That sounds like a better balance for me and for folks who care about the issues that I care about than the alternative. So I wanted to lay the groundwork there, and then, you know, to circle back to question B, again, these questions are also not happening in a vacuum, right? There are different, I don't want to say they're all supported by different people, because if you look at the concentric circles, and lots have been written about it through 7th State and the 7th State blog and other publications, looking at who's behind these ballot questions, but there are like interests behind them that do collide, if you will. And so, you know, behind B, we've talked about Mr. Ficker, and you know, this is not a game. I've been in forums with him as well, and have interacted with him and seen him interact with folks in our chats, which is where he normally does it. You know, this notion that handcuffing our county council and the county when we are facing, as was said before, the biggest crisis certainly that we faced locally, but the biggest global crisis that we faced in some time, and the uncertainty, you know, that brings about. You know, wearing my day job hat, we spent a good deal of time today talking about how President Trump has decided to take off the table any additional COVID packages before the election. And as we're going to our ballot and thinking about how we're going to vote all down the ticket from the top to the bottom, what happens nationally is impacting us locally, because what we've seen throughout the COVID crisis is the folks who have been in charge in the Senate, not in the House, saying that they will not do any state and local aid. So why am I talking about Senate elections and Senate policy when we're talking about county ballot questions? Because if there is no state and local aid coming from the feds, and we don't know how elections will shake out, what the balance of power will be in the Senate at the beginning of next year, but let's just say that the worst happens and that we can't get the Senate to flip, and there's no state and local aid coming our way, coming to Maryland, coming to Montgomery County. Why would we decide on our own to handcuff ourselves here locally when we might not be getting any help coming nationally? And so it just makes no sense, as folks have said. I'm a lawyer, I'm not a tax policy expert, but I can read and understand it doesn't make any sense. And so, and I'll end here because I definitely want to get into the questions. The other thing that really animates me about this tax issue, and Councilmember Friedson and Navarro explained it so clearly about the new path that question A would set us on. But we have to understand that a lot of the folks who aren't on this call, there are about 100 people on this call, and it's a fantastic, fantastic outing, but a lot of the folks in our county of 1.1 million people who are depending on services from county nonprofits, for instance, from folks like Manna that do food nutrition assistance, and we're doing a great job before the pandemic and really had to step up during the pandemic, from organizations like the Renters Alliance that I happen to be the chair of, that does eviction protection and tenant education. During the pandemic, the county stepped up and said, okay, we know where some of these gaps are going to be in our safety net, and the county does a fantastic job, I think, of trying to fund as much as they can fund to try to partner with those organizations to close these gaps. The county during COVID said, we know where these gaps are going to be. We're going to step up and do more, even though we're facing this uncertainty. And again, if we passed question B, we would be foreclosing the county's ability potentially to do that into the future. As has been said many times before, we don't know how long this crisis will last. But what we do know is that we need the county to be in the best fiscal position possible. And the only way to do that on your ballot this year is to pass question A, to vote against question B. And so I'll leave it there and kick it back to Linda, and be happy to join in the discussion and take questions with folks.
Thank you, Marilyn and Will. Let me just, we do have some questions in the chat. They're starting to come in, and trying to keep up with them. But one question I have is, who's behind, this is for Marilyn and Will, I mean, you're here as community leaders, who's behind question D, who's promoting question D, and what, what's motivating them to do that? Question D, and then, who's, and also on question C, who's against question C? What community groups and people in the community?
So I think that they're pretty much the same, the people who are for C are against D and vice versa. So against D was a community-based petition that was funded by a number of Republican groups and individuals who wanted change in the council. And the proponent, and right now the Republican Party in Montgomery County has taken up the 4D against C banner. And they currently are probably the most prominent group that are pushing towards it. It's headed by an individual from Wheaton who is a Democrat, but the Republican Party is pushing the ballot initiative right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and again, I would just add to Marilyn's point. It's sort of it's been a collision of events, right, where there are entrenched entrenched groups in the county, some of whom have lots of money, who have married up with groups of citizens, some of whom have, concerns that we think are, valid and can be addressed in a way that is not, blowing up the council. And so, one of the retorts I feel I see a lot from the question D folks is when you say, oh, well, this is a Republican backed and funded initiative, they say, no, we're, groups of citizens, bipartisan, et cetera, et cetera. there's truth to that, that there are people in the mix that are not themselves all members of the Republican Party, but the power behind it and the organizing behind it is a lot of the conservative folks in the county, because they see the political opportunity, and they're capitalizing on some of the angst felt by a lot of people. That, if you came up to my street up here in Clarksburg, there are a couple of 9D signs that my neighbors have, and I've been trying to talk to people and work on them a little bit, and they express, some of them who've been, up county, up here in Clarksburg since our development was built, who say, well, we were supposed to get this and we didn't get it. We were supposed to get this. And I said, I get it. That's true. And there are ways that we can work on that. But if you fracture the county, if you fracture the council, excuse me, you're not going to be able to work on those issues like you think. So, it's just, folks got to think about the bargain that they're making here.
Can I just add something?
Sure. Go ahead, Nancy.
So Jim Michaels did put on the chat, I just looked at the chat, where most of the money came from. 7th State did publish some articles regarding the funding. And when I read that, it was clear to me that, a group of residents, and I think there was a lot of impetus with some conservative people, Republicans who, had this concern about up-county representation and at large being concentrated, but also saw an opportunity to perhaps have a better chance, given that we are, overwhelmingly Democrats. But when I saw this taking off, I was a little bit, intrigued by it. And then I saw the 7th State blogs. For me, what it says is that there were particular powerful interests that perhaps were not very happy with some of the votes that the council had taken, maybe not as pro-development as they wanted. We also saw some union support, and perhaps they were upset because of some of the difficult decisions we had to make in light of the difficult fiscal decisions regarding particular increases in races, for example. And so it seemed like it was an opportunity for folks who were not happy on both sides to then get behind this proposal. But as it has been mentioned before, the thing that I found most concerning about the proposal of 9 districts is that whole issue of parochialism. And right now, the way it works with us is that no doubt the at-large members have this macro, if you will, responsibility, strategic vision for the county. District council members, we kind of wear, double hats, if you will, because we have to be very much in the micro situations in our district and respond to constituent services needs, et cetera, and really, kind of cheerlead for the needs in our district. But we also have to vote on countywide issues. And so that balance, especially of residents being able to vote for 5, it's a very important balance. And I think, in my opinion, I think that it's a very important structure. But there's no doubt that when you look at who the funders were, you see folks on different sides who maybe had their own particular reasons why they may have been upset with the council and wanted kind of like a fresh start, if you will.
Yeah. And just to be clear, what was put in the chat was that it was real estate developers who were putting up the money for this.
Yeah, but there were some unions that had given some in-kind support.
There were some unions as well, right? Yeah. But in the chat, it said real estate developers. There are a couple of other questions. I'm going to stick with questions C and D for now, and then we had some questions on A and B, and we'll go back. I think Council Member Friedson's been addressing some of those in the chat, but we'll go back and look at some of those. But let's just stick with C and D for a moment. So one question that was asked pretty early on was how did question C come about to get on the ballot? And I think what the person means, if I could, is what was the process? And they ask straight out, does the council violate its own rules by putting this out there? I don't know if someone from the council wants to address how that gets on the ballot.
No, the council did not violate any rules. The council has the prerogative of putting on the ballot questions. There are different mechanisms through which questions come upon, are placed on the ballot. One way, of course, is to gather the signatures. Another is when the Charter Commission makes recommendations, and then the council can, choose to put that forward. And another is for council members to perhaps, put something forward as well, so it gets introduced. I think there were some questions about, I think somebody raised the question of, did we violate our rules? Our attorney, I think, answered that when we were going to take that on. There was no violation, there was notice, everything was followed. Of course, I think it feels a bit different for us right now because since we're virtual, a lot of things are very different, and maybe that was, it felt that way, but our county attorney actually spoke that day and explained what is the process, and we just follow the process that that the council has always followed. And then of course there was, a vote, there was discussion, et cetera, and then there was a vote.
Right, yeah, okay, thank you. Thank you for explaining that. And a couple of other things about questions C and D. So, Fran Rothstein asked says that a number of people who've asked about these ballot questions want to keep the current council makeup. They don't want to change it. And she's concerned that, and it's pretty clear that C is kind of a counterpart to D, as Councilmember Navarro kind of described the process there. But it's not really C versus D. So when people go in and vote, they can vote for one or the other. And she's a little concerned and wants to know if we think that there's any way D could pass because enough people want to keep the status quo and inadvertently put D over the top. And
Linda, that's not quite it. Can I jump in?
Sure.
If people want to keep the current system, they could very well vote against both C and D. Likewise, they could vote for both C and D. They're not positioned as one thing that you're voting for or against. It's two different initiatives, two different ballot questions. Is there any way that D could pass if enough voters decide, I like the way it is, I want to keep the status quo, and they vote against both C and D?
So thanks, Fran. And I think it's important, same thing with A and B. You're not voting either
right.
for A or B. Both questions are for and against. All four questions are for and against. That's important. So if, for instance, somebody wanted to keep the status quo, they would be voting against D. They have to vote against D. If you're passionate about this question, you have to vote against D. You can't just say, I like it the way it is, I'm not voting for either one. A vote against D is critical. If you don't want to vote for C, of course, we hope that you do, but you could vote against either one, as long as, and it's just, majority wins. So that's why what Mr. Leggett said at the very beginning is so important. The people who are passionate about these questions are going to go and vote for them. And it is a presidential election. So unlike the primaries that Montgomery County is used to, we will have a lot of Republicans who are voting in this election, and we assume at this point, or they're being talked to vote for B and for C, and we want to make sure that our votes counter that. So I hope that if people are, Fran, to your question, if people want the status quo, at the very least, they vote against D.
Well, that's what I have suggested to them, but a lot of people go in and they really haven't thought about this stuff first. The way it is on the ballot, you run the risk that people will essentially vote almost against their own interests because they don't understand it.
Well, Fran, let me interject 1 second, because I think this is why we formed the coalition, myself, Connie Morella, David Blair, and Carmen Lawson because of the confusion that you've just described. And this is why we start off by saying essentially the thing that you do first above any and everything else is to vote against B and against D. If you do that and starting off, then you then have the option of saying, okay, which is good, to vote for A or you vote for C. But under no circumstances whatsoever, you should not vote for B or D. And it gets us back to what Marilyn just stated. Vote against B, vote against D, and then you can selectively go for A or C or whatever it is. So if you start with that, that is the safest position that you can be in.
Yeah. Councilmember Navarro, did you want to add something?
Actually, I wanted to reiterate how important it is to vote against B and D. I have to hop off to another event. It is the month of the Hispanic Heritage Month celebrations, and there's just many of them. So I'm gonna join another Zoom event. But I just wanted to, to say thank you and reiterate that, it is not easy to explain all of this. I think this is why these meetings are so important, and your role and also talking to your neighbors and your friends, et cetera, really makes a huge difference. So I really want to thank everybody for your efforts. And please make sure that you have your plan to vote, and that we all hopefully will be celebrating after November 3rd, because we just have so many different things that we have to tackle. So much is on the line. But really, thank you for the opportunity to be with you this evening and share some of this information. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Navarro. So before we leave this topic about, voting against, voting for, I just want to point out that Jim Michaels has put in the chat that, of course, what happens if both fail is we're at the status quo. But if both pass, it seems that we also are at the status quo. Just would point out that Jim worked with the Central Committee on a ballot question advisory committee that did a comprehensive report on this. And this was part of what he studied and did an addendum to the report about this very issue. So if both pass, it seems as if, according to an Attorney General's opinion, and according to what Jim put in the chat, it seems as if that they will be nullified and the status quo will be in place. But as Fran and others have pointed out, people don't vote that way, right? So they vote on each individual question. So so now I'd like to we can come back to C and D, but I'd like to go back to a couple of things that were raised about question A's, just to make sure that everybody saw these answers. Councilmember Friedson has been answering them in the chat. So there were a couple questions about the tax rate, and one was why is the income tax rate why is it the income tax rate that A is tied to and not the real estate rate? And Councilmember Friedson answered it in the chat. I'm trying to find it here. He said what the county collects what's called a piggyback tax, which is a percentage of your taxes when you pay your Maryland state taxes. So he might want to expound on that a little bit. And
yeah,
then
I'll just really quickly, the question was why don't we raise income taxes instead of property taxes? Most people believe that property taxes are more regressive than income taxes because your house could take up a disproportionate amount of your wealth, whereas your income, the higher net worth you are, the more your, the lower, the percentage changes. The state of Maryland has a piggyback tax, which is the percentage that you get. It's capped at 3.2% that the local governments can collect. We are maxed out. While Ike Leggett was on the county council with Bruce Adams and some others, they changed that to max out what the county was allowed to collect, which makes it as progressive as we can. We collect about 46%, give or take, each year in property tax. About 41% of total revenues come from income taxes. We are at the cap. I will say one thing that is lost on most people. Most local jurisdictions do not collect income taxes at all. Almost all of their revenue is generated from property taxes. And so the fact that we have an income tax is progressive, but our ability to change, unless there's a change in state law, we are at the maximum. That's why the revenue for the property tax is the biggest and most important lever that the county has within the budget.
And it was also asked, Andrew, what the new tax rate would be. Do you want to go over the answer that you put in the
Yeah,
chat?
it's currently 0.9785 per $100 assessed. So it's basically 98 cents per $100, or in other words, a fraction under 1% of the value of your house. And the question was, what would the rate be? The answer is that. That's the beauty of question A. If question A passes, that current rate of just under 98 cents per 100 would stay the rate cap unless 9 members of the county council voted to increase it. The current system that we have, it basically jumps all over the place and actually goes down over time because it's tied to inflation, which, as we just talked about earlier, is such a low number, 1.26% going down to 0.6%. And because it doesn't allow us to benefit from the new economic development and economic growth and new residents and new businesses that we have.
Right. And then another question was, what if property values go down? Property values and new development would go down. And you said in the chat that revenue would go down. It puts us all in the same boat when businesses and residents are doing well and the economy is doing well. The county will do well too. If we struggle, we'll struggle together with the existing system. The rates go down over time and we don't receive much, if any, benefits from new economic growth. So, there.
The one thing that I would clarify for my own answer, I'm like rebutting myself here, but just to add an additional point, one of the perverse things about the current system is that the only time when tax rates go up is during economic downturns, because if the rates, if the revenues are dropping because the values of property go down, then they will raise rates, or we're allowed to at least allowed to raise rates up to the revenue cap from the previous year. So at a time when you can afford a tax increase the least, when the economy is doing the worst, the county is able to impose new challenging property taxes on you. But in normal times, when everybody is doing well, we're not getting the full benefit from that growth and from that added economic activity. And what that means over time is we generally lose out. The county generally loses out, and it costs us. You heard earlier with Will Roberts talking about our nonprofit community, and nobody had done more to partner with nonprofits than Ike Leggett. But that program that we have in the county to do community grants, it's about $13.5 million a year. If you look at the last 16 years, that is the average amount of increased revenue, almost to the number, that question A would have generated had we had a stable tax rate in place. It's the entire community grants program that partners with nonprofits to provide services to the most vulnerable in our community, and nobody led that partnership more than Ike Leggett. So I think it's, as we talk about what these things actually mean, it means real services to folks in group homes and young people who are most at risk, and all of the amazing partnerships that we have in the county.
Right. And someone also in the chat raised this issue of the unanimity, the requirement of unanimous vote when it comes to raising the taxes. And so what I'd like to also point out, I'd like maybe Will or Marilyn can address this. So the fact that we have this requirement that was passed in a prior budget, a prior ballot question by the voters about unanimous voting, how does that mesh with the proposals to expand the council, and what the complexion of the council would be of at large versus district? Marilyn or Will, do you want to address that?
That's a good question. For me, sounds like Marilyn has a thought here also. For me, I think that not just getting to unanimity on an issue, if I'm hearing your question correctly, would be difficult, but getting getting broad agreement on lots of issues, I think, would be more difficult under, you know, the sectarian, you know, a fractured system. And, you know, you could look to, there are, you know, modern examples, you know, just around our region. Prince George's went back and forth with this for a while. You know, it just, and there's, you know, a question in the chat about, you know, what's the argument? You know, if we stay with the 4 at large, what's the argument for adding the 2 additional seats? And Maryland sort of laid out the numbers for you about our population growth vis-a-vis, you know, juxtaposed against the makeup of the county. And the reason I think question C is a good medium is because it's saying, look, for folks who think that our districts could be smaller, question C would do that. They'd give you 2 additional districts and 2 additional people to service you there. But to your question, Linda, I really think, you know, that this concern that we're raising is not overblown. You know, the former county executive Leggett talked about, you know, vote trading and people being, you know, hyper parochial. Certainly we understand politics and the policy process, and that, you know, there are negotiations happening about issues. Nobody's naive about that. But, you know, the notion that we would put everybody in 9 fortresses and then say, here, you know, here's a problem, attack it from your 9 different points of view, I think we would end up with some disastrous consequences.
Here's a challenge that we have not fully addressed that is so dangerous and is interrelated between these two ballot initiatives. Keep in mind, on one hand, that the current system and any move toward a new system will require all council members to be able to vote in order to vote affirmatively in order to increase taxes either above the rate of inflation or to change the tax rate. You need all 9. Now, what does that have to do with the district council members? Now, here's where you have to be careful about what the Republican motives are. And I'm talking now in a political tone. If under any scenario, you increase, as they see it, the likelihood that by creating more districts, either 7 or more especially 9, it increases the likelihood that they believe that they therefore will get an elected member of the council. Now, what does that have to do therefore with the all 9 members needing to vote? It would mean that if you have 1 either errant Democrat, conservative otherwise, or 1 Republican, that 1 single person will have virtually control over the entire council and the budgetary process. Keep in mind, you need all 9. So if you have a crisis today and you need to go above one of those limits, and you need to get all of the council members to vote, and they come out of districts, and you get 1 errant person who's highly conservative, right-wing reactionary, or Republican that way, or even a potential Democrat, that 1 person therefore will be able to control the entire budgetary process. Why? Because the moment you say, I want to increase the budget over and above the current limitations, that 1 person can say no. In order to do that, you must give me X, Y, Z, and E. And when you have 9, all 9 in districts, you increase that likelihood. You could have a situation where a Republican, 1 single Republican, either 1 out of 11 or 1 out of 9, could dictate the entire budgetary process. In essence, these 2 initiatives are in some way need to be viewed together because you need all 9. And so when you increase the likelihood that you have fractionalism, partisan bickering, you have the parochialism, then you undermine the likelihood that you will get all 9 to vote if, just in case, you need to get all 9 voters. It is a real challenge here. You need to look at that as well.
Marilyn, did you have anything to add there?
Well, I was going to go back to the original question of what does the 9 votes mean if it's an all 9 district or if it goes to 11. And I was going to say, I don't know if it says that you have to have a unanimous vote or 9 votes. So we'd have to look at that. Andrew, I don't know if you know.
Yeah, it was changed, actually. In fact, this might work against us, but
right.
In the last election, there was a technical change, if you recall. One of the ballot questions was to change an affirmative vote of 9 council members, and it was changed to a unanimous requirement of all current council members.
Right.
The reason why all current was included was there was a concern of a vacancy if an election, or excuse me, if a decision were going to be made during the time of a vacancy, passing like with Marilyn Praisner,
right.
or some other type of incapacity or retirement, resignation, et cetera, then it was unclear of what the law would allow. And so it is set up currently to be for the 11, because all current, if it changes to 11, would change the number automatically to 11. So, that is a challenge.
Switching up just a little bit, this is still about C and D. So Lynn Olson makes the point that even though our earlier discussion notwithstanding, that voters think C and D are like Trump and Biden, maybe not, that they're running against each other, kind of in that way. So she wants to make sure that the messaging makes it clear what the importance is here. So, Marilyn and Will, you're working on messaging campaigns, and, maybe you can talk a little bit, Marilyn, about the messaging.
Well, I want to say that the Montgomery County Democratic Central Committee has done an excellent job with their messaging. It's 4 questions. You have to vote for all 4 questions. You're voting for A against B, for C against D. 4 questions. And I think, and that's the message that we continue to put out. Now, there are some organizations that are only taking a position on 1 of the 4 or 2 of the 4, but it's great that the Central Committee has come out on all 4 questions. And Lynn, you're absolutely right. It is confusing. So we're trying to put out that consistent 4 questions, vote for all 4. Yeah.
Yeah, I would just add. I was trying to find on my other computer a link, because there are lots of, I know in your comment, Lynn, you mentioned sort of visuals. There are lots of great visuals and great information. As Marilyn has mentioned, the Central Committee has done a great job breaking this complicated stuff down into sort of paragraph form that you can digest. But both Montgomery Neighbors Against Question B, the group I'm co-chairing along with Joel Ortman-Faust, and Marilyn's the efforts that Andrew and County Executive Leggett and others are leading, have sort of lots of visuals coming at you. And so hopefully on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, whatever, pick your poison, you will see some of that because, we do, there we go. Right. Look at that. How about that coordination? So this is one of those graphics that you might have seen going around out there, which sort of breaks it down just really succinctly, all 4 on 1, because we do want to mitigate confusion. Ballot questions are just confusing on their face for a lot of people who are just used to voting for candidates. So I do hope, Lynn and others, that you'll see more visuals being pushed out there for sure.
Yeah, and for our part, we are intending on having some signage at the polls that is something along those lines, so that people can just look and see it. And if you want to go to our website and read about what the Central Committee is saying, about what the Montgomery Democratic Party is saying, you can go to mcdcc.org/sample ballots. I put it wrong in the chat, it's plural, I'll put it in again. And there's quite a good discussion there about messaging. There was, we're almost finished. In fact, I think we are. There was a sort of an interesting discussion about yield tax rate, and Andrew and Melissa and Debbie on her iPhone got into those things. And if you're interested in that, you can take a look in the chat, but we're coming up on 9 o'clock. And so I would just like to thank everybody who was here tonight and who presented, particularly people who came out of retirement to do that, as well as others and community activists who are working hard to make sure that our county remains a great place to live that it is, and the council members who are really trying to navigate during a very difficult time, keeping our county on the right path and going into the future. And I want to thank all of you, because I know so many people on this call are also doing so many other things for this election to make sure that it turns out in a way that makes our country better, makes our county better, makes our state better. And so thanks to all of you for everything that you're doing. We don't have very many days to go. We have less than a month. I think it's like 23 days or something like that. So for the next 23 days, don't let up. Make your calls, talk to your neighbors, get out there, get people to vote, help people get their ballots, and make sure you and your family vote as well. Because this is the most important election in our lifetime. There's no question about it. And this is not just certainly at the presidential level, that's true, but it's also true that we need to have informed voters going to the polls and voting on these ballot questions. So whatever you can do to get the word out about these ballot questions and getting people to the polls is much appreciated. Thank you, everybody. We're going to go forward. I know that on November 4th, we're going to have a great victory celebration. We're all going to feel terrific about where we are. And these last 4 years will just be, like a bad dream, and we can move forward. We'll have to undo a lot of damage, but we can move forward and make our country, dare I say it, great again. Thank you, everybody, for showing up and for being here and for your insightful questions. Thank you, everybody who spoke on the issues. Thank you to all of our sponsors, particularly the Women's Democratic Club, for hosting a really terrific forum. I think that's about it. Unless anybody else has anything they want to add, Diana?
Just remind everybody that all the Democratic clubs are on the same page on all 4 questions. And I think it's important to say that there are 4 different questions. The distinction about A versus B, A and B have to be voted on. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Linda, and everybody for holding it together under budget and on time.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. And the resources have been listed in the chat. I think Diana said she's going to send them out.
We're going to capture all that.
Lots of visuals. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Be safe. Have a good night.
A long day.